This here is my personal rig, and I don't talk too much about it because there's really nothing super exciting about it by today's standards. It just runs a RTX 2080 from Asus. I really like the way that that card looks. And then I think Z590, so we're talking like 11th gen Intel, 11900K, 32 gigs of DDR4. And, you know, it was a good build for the time, and I have switched quite frequently between AMD and Intel just because that's part of my job, experimenting with different hardware so I can report back to you guys on my findings. But this has been my tried and true editing rig for a very long time. Because the 11900K is very stable the way I have it, it works great in Premiere Pro thanks to the integrated graphics, and just overall the combination is, well, it suits my monitor setup, 1440p, 144 hertz or so, and it looks really clean at that. I love this black and white aesthetic. We've got custom black cables in there and just subtle white lighting, no RGB. And I'll be honest, I have been hesitant for the past year or two about posting some sort of like personal rig update vlog because graphics cards have been so expensive. I mean, I could, you know, mess around with CPUs and whatnot, but I really didn't feel right throwing like an RTX 3090 or 3080 Ti into my personal rig, knowing full well most of you either couldn't afford one because they were so marked up in price or just couldn't buy one because they straight up weren't available. And that's where this bad boy comes into play. This here is an RTX 3080 Ti from Galax, and while I have tested it, we've built with it in the past, I haven't actually personally used it in a rig for any long amount of time. It's just sat in the closet collecting dust. And again, that's because I honestly felt guilty using a card like this when the only reason I even had a card like this was because I was in the position I was in. You know, as a YouTuber, I get sent stuff like this, usually just for exposure. They'll send a card out like this for free. But again, exposing you all to a card like this that you couldn't actually buy was just, to me, that was beyond stupidity. So I feel a lot better about using this now, and I know this is last gen tech, but I'm super excited to finally have a 3080 Ti in my personal editing and gaming rig. And for the platform upgrade, I really hesitated between Intel and AMD, partly because, well, AMD released their stuff first, and I didn't just want to jump on the AMD bandwagon without seeing what Intel was going to do. And lo and behold, their 13900K came out with integrated graphics, of course, which does help in the Adobe Premiere suite. I was, yeah, pretty excited about this, and I think we're going to go with this chip here. And look, I know that no matter what I say here, at least one person will jump to the comments and scream that I'm an Intel shill. They somehow paid me under the table, even though they actually didn't. This video is not sponsored by, well, the pre-roll might have, I don't know, an ad from somebody in it, but it's not going to be an Intel or AMD ad. And I haven't taken money from either of these companies in a very long time. So this is just my personal preference, my choice. Again, based on my workloads, I think Intel suits me better. You can decide for yourself whether or not AMD or Intel make more sense for your rig. See, that wasn't so hard. Can't we all just get along? Now there is quite a bit in this rig that we will be recycling, starting first with the DDR4. Is it DDR4? Oh, actually I can't recycle that. I just remembered this is kind of a thing now. We have to worry about the discrepancies between DDR4 and DDR5. And this board supports DDR5, so yeah, that changes things slightly. Anyway, the other things we're going to be recycling, scratch that one, we'll be recycling the power supply. Plenty for this rig, even with the updated graphics card and CPU. We'll be recycling the custom sleeve cables. We'll be recycling this beefy Asus ROG, what is it called? The Ryujin 2360 AIO. Yep, we're going to save that. And we're also going to be saving the case because I really like what Be Quiet did with the PureBase 500DX. And yeah, I want to practice what I preach. There's really nothing wrong with this at all. So this should be a fun one. I hope you'll stay with me. To get rid of that annoying Windows activation watermark, head on over to VIP SCD Key. Purchase a Windows 10 Pro OEM key for a fraction of the price of retail. Just use a secure payment method like PayPal, enter your product key into your PC settings window, and say bye-bye to the watermark. And be sure to use our offer code SKGS for a sweet discount. The very first thing I want to do here is get our current M.2 situated. Now I want to stress that this is not something I typically recommend, even though we are still staying within the Intel ecosystem. It is generally good practice to start fresh because you still might have some conflicting drivers and things that affect performance long term. Maybe worst case you run into some instabilities. I think we'll be okay, but if I do notice anything, I'll report back in the comment section. We've got this large heat slab here to keep our M.2 nice and cool. Well, not too cool, I don't think we want that. Our 13900K is up next, and installation is pretty straightforward. Same as always for LGA stuff, but you want to be very careful of the tiny little pins in the socket. Let's see if we can, is this Is this not gonna, am I doing something? Why is this so cringy? What am I doing wrong here? Oh, I just have to remove the cover first, okay? And there we go. For system memory, I'm opting for 4 sticks of DDR5 Corsair Vengeance models. And yes, RGB is missing. That is intentional. I really like the sleek design of these. And while these aren't super fast by any means, they will get the job done. Now it's time to partly cannibalize our old rig. I think we're gonna try to keep the AIO in here, and we'll pull everything else out just to save on time. Probably not gonna work out that way. I'll have to remove everything. We'll see. Go ahead and remove this cooler. Try to wiggle this graphics card out of here. It's a very tight fit, but I love compact builds. They look really good with very little empty space. And, oh my God, that could have been bad. I really should just remove this outright, but I'm stubborn. We're gonna charge ahead. I was gonna say, out comes, very carefully, this platform. Doing my best not to scratch the case or damage any components. Just, oh, carefully here, wiggle it on out. I forgot about front I/O cables. There we go. Wow, that was more painful than it needed to be. We're obviously gonna start with fresh thermal paste, so we'll get all this off of here. It's getting very messy already. And here we are, just reversing everything we just did, except with new hardware. I'm gonna slide this platform in. And in this case, you wanna be very careful not to snag any cables, get them stuck behind the board. We'd have to undo and redo this entire process a third time. This, I think, upgrading a PC, especially when it comes to upgrading a platform, is a bit more troublesome than just outright building a PC from scratch. There's not a lot of room here to work with. And of course, we're having a fitment issue with this rear fan. Are you kidding me? Looks like we gotta remove this again.
A few moments later.
All right, and so far, so good. I know it still looks a bit messy just because the AIO stuff is dangling. We've also got the supplemental 8 pins to connect once we get our card in here. But I wanted to show you that around the back, I really didn't have to rewire anything with the exception of the USB 3.0 cable. All of the other ports on this new Gigabyte board were in literally almost the exact same places as the old NZXT board. So it really worked out there, kept cable management a breeze since we already took care of it earlier. And now it's time for the fit and finish. We'll get the cooler back on the new CPU, and then we'll slot in our graphics card. I'm a bit worried about fitment. The good thing is though, we can move these fans, for the front intake fans for the radiator, up front in this little cutout here in the 500DX. Really nice that Be Quiet gave us that flexibility. You could add a thicker radiator back here if you wanted and move those fans up front, which we might have to do, but for the sake of keeping things compact inside, I'm gonna try not to. Now, I'm going to have Jeremy include footage of me adding this thermal paste merely because I always get someone again in the comments who says, oh, you forgot the paste because you didn't show it. That must mean that it's not there. So here's a polka dot Picasso for you. That should be good for coverage. I really like that this Ryogen cooler has a top flow fan for active VRM cooling. It's not a necessity, but especially for a higher end Intel rig, it's nice to have. We're gonna go ahead and slap on this screen though to cover it up. I don't actually use this digital display, and the reason why is because Asus still hasn't added support for vertical displays yet. Everything is turned sideways because they normally want you to orient it that way, but I prefer this because it keeps the tubes out of the way. Why is this not, what is going on here? Why, what am I doing wrong? Oh, there we go. You just gotta kind of finesse it in there, and there you go, that's it. It's like magnetic, no screws, nothing. Pretty sweet. I'm gonna casually slot my Elgato 4K 60 capture card in here. This thing is an absolute beast and a must for content creators, in my opinion. And lastly, for the part swap, we have the enchilada, the main course, my friends. This here is the RTX 3080 Ti, which I know is a gen old, probably not super exciting to most of you, but I cannot wait to get this in my rig. I'm fanboying just a bit, I'll admit, because, well, I've just never really gamed with something this powerful before. Well, again, I should clarify, at least not in my personal editing slash gaming rig. I do have a 3080 in the racing sim, and I have had that there for a good while. I did actually forget about that, but all I do is play racing games with that, and it is a heck of a job, I will say. And isn't she a beauty? Not quite as pretty as our old Asus Strix card, but she'll do. I'm not gonna complain at all. What's up, buddy? Did you just walk in?
Yeah, because it's Essen time.
It's Essen time? It's time for Essen?
Yeah.
He loves spinning fans. That's like his thing. Here goes the moment of truth. Will she fit? And oh my gosh, it is extremely tight as I expected. I'm not sure if I can finesse this one in here. I'm gonna wiggle the card as far back as I can. Oh my gosh, this is cringe. Actually, let me remove this bracket from the case. Maybe that'll give us a bit more play. And then, holy cow. Oh yes, that's it. Okay. That's all it took. Just had to come in at a steep angle of approach, and that will do it. It's funny, this card doesn't really protrude much from the slot itself. Compared to our Strix 2080, this is actually more of a compact card left to right. It's just, yeah, a bit deeper front to back. And there we go. Our custom cables are all tidied up. They're a bit, they have a tendency to want to lean in one direction, but still looks pretty clean. I'm okay with this. Here's one more quick shot of the cable management behind the motherboard tray. You can see how we've done our best to keep all of these cables out of view from the left side since we removed this little SSD tray that normally comes in the 500DX. So we want as minimal cable exposure as possible. This right side panel should slide on fairly easily because it really hasn't changed much since the last rig. There we go, and then we'll just tighten her down. That easy. Now overall, I will say compared to the previous version of my editing rig, this doesn't look as blacked out, and that's kind of a bummer, but this is really all I had on hand in terms of Z790 hardware. This Gigabyte board was sent with the Intel review kit, so I had this on hand. And then of course the graphics card has some white accents in it, which we can't really get around. I'm probably gonna keep the LEDs off in the card. Of course, we don't have LEDs this time in our memory, and I think I'm gonna keep the screen off again as well. So we might do some background illumination with the case lighting. That's probably about it. And I think overall it's still gonna look pretty darn cool. Now it's time to well, make sure that everything works. It's kind of important. Hey, there we go. So it all booted up just fine. I obviously had to update some drivers. Windows did that automatically for us. I've got the old graphics drivers DDU'd, the new ones installed, even though the driver was technically the same. The card is different, so I wanted to play it safe. The only issue I'm having, Galac's RGB software, like their Aura RGB software, is absolute dog water and was not working at all on this rig. Couldn't get it to load up. You can see I've got the Aura Sync installed, but it's just not doing what it wants to do. So I did the reasonable thing and just completely disconnected the RGB through that hub. I think that's only for RGB. I think this one here is for the fans, and they are spinning below. So that was a quick fix, a little hot fix there, but otherwise, it's a smooth sailing. I mean, this rig is very quiet at idle, and there's one test that I want to do, and it involves this application right here. So our 13900K has a ton of cores packed into it, and not only that, very high frequencies as well. 13th gen made a pretty big leap there as well. So let's just see what happens, shall we? Clicking run in 3, 2, 1. Holy cow. I don't think I've ever seen Cinebench work this fast, with the exception of maybe like a 64 core Xeon or Threadripper or something. This is crazy. Now the system is very hot, and we're gonna do some tweaking just behind the scenes to try to get the voltage in check so that we're not dumping out so much heat, and just gonna look for that optimal performance range. But holy cow, 39,117. That destroys a Threadripper 2990 WX, the 32 core CPU there. So obviously a beast. By this point, I'm sure you're already very familiar with how 13900Ks perform, and also their 7950X counterparts from Team Red. I've never had a CPU this powerful before, so I'm gonna have a lot of fun playing with this thing. Also, combined with a 3080 Ti, I mean, this is gonna be a heck of a rig. Obviously, it's no 4090 or 4080, but this is still the best I've ever worked with, so excited to see how things pan out long term. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by giving this one a thumbs up. That would be greatly appreciated. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Consider joining us on our public Discord server, totally for free there. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that. That's linked below as well. And I'll catch you in the next one. My name's Greg. Thanks for building with me.